Masculinity isn't just in crisis, it's nearly extinct. Modern Western society praises those who are docile, obedient, and weak, while simultaneously lashing out at anyone who dares to pursue strength, discipline, and courage. The resentful and bitter amongst us have gripped their claws into the masculine ideal that they can't live up to and dragged it through the dirt. Over the last few decades, young men have increasingly had less and less traditional masculine figures to look up to, being replaced by frail, incompetent, and goofy individuals. Today, many think a good man is one that routinely participates in self-abasement, meaning in the eyes of modern culture, the more a man disdains his nature, the more virtuous he becomes.
Isn't it just time for women to run the planet? I'm not just trying to placate you, I swear. But I don't know what else to do because we, men, we've been running the show since what, 10,000 BC? Something like that? And we're not doing so good. So, please, can you guys just take over?
I want to make it clear, I'm not saying the world should be run exclusively by men. However, I think the very common and celebrated notion that the best thing a man can do is sit down, shut up, and get out of everyone's way is ridiculous. Now, I know I'm one more pro-masculine sentence away from coming off like a bald, egocentric maniac with a receding chin, but what is important to note is the reason this guy became an icon to lost young men is because of the incessant labeling of everything as toxic masculinity. This created a vacuum for a master manipulator to come along and fill the void carved out by people propagating man-hatred behind the veil of female empowerment. It's ironic that those who despise this modern embodiment of Machiavellianism are the ones who created him. After all, as Newton's third law of physics states, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. The quote-unquote top G is just the universe attempting to bring balance to the scales that were tipped by blue-haired blobs. So over the course of this video, I'm going to try to fill the gaps left wide open by feminists and the red pill community. I aim to do that by laying out what masculinity looks like at its best and worst, why men have no natural value, redefining the concept of the alpha male, the symbiotic nature of masculinity and femininity, and what happens to a society lacking strong men. I also want to point out to any ladies still watching this, which I'm almost certain there isn't, this is valuable information for you as well, because you should not settle for anything less than what I outline in this video. In fact, as the decision makers in who gets to carry on their genes, I'd say it's your moral obligation not to settle for anything less than what I discuss. After all, men rise or fall to the standards that women set for them.
Let's go, girl.
If before we get into things, you wouldn't mind subscribing to our channel, that would be greatly appreciated. Masculinity can be broadly defined by the embodiment of responsibility and strength. Responsibility is the duty of supervising those who need guidance and the ability to make important decisions with little to no supervision. You can't be responsible without first being strong, meaning the ability to withstand strain, stress, and attacks, both physically and mentally. A good man is a leader. A bad man is a tyrant. The key difference between the two is whether you set an example and reward those who follow it, or if you dictate rules and punish those who don't follow them. A good man is competent. A bad man is one who lacks effectiveness. A good man uses his competence in order to protect and provide for those around him. A bad man is one who seeks to punish in order to make up for his insecurities. A good man is one who sacrifices his desires in order to create an environment where others are able to pursue theirs. A weak man chases his desires at the expense of others. A good man is formidable. A bad man is weak. Lastly, a good man uses all the characteristics I just listed as weapons in the fight for life, liberty, and justice. A bad man tries to make up for his lacking character by accruing power, resources, and status. Ironically, by embracing strength and responsibility in fighting for life, liberty, and justice, you will often be bestowed with power, resources, and status. The important thing to take away from that is that power should not be pursued, but if you make the proper sacrifices and build your character, they almost always ensue. Now, let's get into why men are the only form of humans that are not deserving of respect simply for existing.
Only women, children, and dogs are loved unconditionally. Women, children, and dogs are loved unconditionally. A man is only loved under the condition that he provides something.
There's a biological explanation for what Chris Rock pointed out in that clip. Let's imagine that there's only 100 humans left on Earth. If 99 of them are men and only one woman, humanity is as good as extinct. This is because a woman can only carry one child per year, a rate far too low to be able to increase the population. However, on the other side of the coin, if there's 99 women and one man, they could theoretically double the population within a single year. I would also like to throw out that if that were ever the case, I will take one for the team and fulfill this role of repopulator. Again, a good man is willing to make sacrifices. An important note is you should not complain that men are biologically valueless. There's nothing more cringe than a men's rights activist who complains that society does not treat men well enough. A man creates his value, which will directly determine how society treats him. It's common for the red pill community to complain about women's standards in treatment of men. However, what I'd say to them is that if all the women in the world look at you and say, "No thanks," maybe, just maybe, it's not them, but rather you. So take some responsibility for yourself and become somebody worthy of love and respect. It's really not that hard. In fact, it's almost never been easier. The average man these days is docile, undisciplined, and physically resembles the Michelin Man. According to the Statistics Brain Research Institute, only 15% of people have an active gym membership, and only 15% of those people actually use them. One of the most insane stats is that 8% of Americans have enough assets to be considered a millionaire, while only 3% have visible abs. If, as a man, you can put down the donuts and work without looking at the clock, you will appear godly to almost everyone around you. It's really simple to get respect. That's why I have zero patience for men complaining that society doesn't care about us. It takes quite literally a modicum of effort to attract a massive amount of respect. Now, let's move on to one of the most cringe and misused terms, the alpha male. There's an epidemic of men walking around declaring themselves as alpha males. I'd suggest these men adhere to the wisdom of Tywin Lannister.
I am the king! I will punish you.
Any man who must say, "I am the king," is no true king.
People in the manosphere constantly talk about alpha males. They usually describe an alpha male as somebody who is dominant and bends the world to his will. However, this is scientifically false. Frans de Waal, one of the world's leading primatologists, who is largely attributed for coining the term alpha male, has said himself this term is frequently mischaracterized. To quote the man, "You should not call a bully an alpha male." After years and years of studying chimp behavior, he found that while yes, strength and an intimidating physique plays a part, there's actually many more qualities that are required in order for a chimp to ascend the social hierarchy. Other qualities include being good with children and extremely generous. He points out, quote, "The alpha male has two sorts of obligations. One is to keep the peace in the group. We call that the control role. By this, he means that the alpha chimp uses his strength to promote peace, not bullying others." De Waal goes on to say, "The second is to be the most empathetic, the consoler-in-chief, so to speak." Another extremely important aspect of being an alpha male is the ability to create and maintain coalitions, aka relationships, which you can't do as a tyrant. The beginning of the end for the alpha chimp is when he starts being forceful and oppressive. This causes other chimps in the group to form coalitions in order to take out the tyrannical leader, often in an extremely violent manner. Now, let's dig into how masculinity and femininity fit together in order to create the puzzle piece that is humanity. Anyone trying to create a narrative that men and women are adversaries is doing so out of a deep insecurity and is utterly destructive to society. The manosphere constantly paints women as gold diggers and emotional manipulators, whereas feminists like to make men sound like oppressive abusers. While both of these descriptions can be applied to some men and some women, they are not the rule, they are the exception. Men and women are a team who desperately need each other. If you look back thousands of years over the span of which our behavioral patterns evolved, the necessity of cooperation between men and women becomes evident. Without modern energy, shelter, and agriculture, when women were pregnant and nursing a child, they were extremely vulnerable to both the elements and predators. During this period, women needed a man to protect them from threats and provide them with the resources necessary for their survival, mainly food. On the flip side, If a man was ever injured while fulfilling these duties, he would need someone to nurse his wounds. If a man or woman was without the other during these vulnerable periods, they'd both perish. There's also a very common narrative that men lived large all throughout history at the expense of women's liberties. This couldn't be further from the truth. For example, it's commonly tossed around that women weren't allowed to vote and were the property of men. Now, this is a reality, but is lying by omission. However, reality is much more complicated. Let's look at the United Kingdom in regards to the voting issue. Before the People's Act of 1918, only wealthy men and property owners were allowed to vote, which was a minority of men. The People Act of 1918 extended voting rights to men over 21 and some women over 30. Just a decade later, voting rights were given to all women over 21. The truth is that while yes, most women didn't have equal rights, neither did most men. Majority of men throughout history were either slaves or soldiers. This is not to say that women didn't have it hard, but rather that the history of humanity can be described as suffering for all. You can't take an extremely small and powerful minority of men who had power and wealth, then extrapolate that and use it to describe the experience of being a man generally. On the more psychological and spiritual side of gender dynamics, masculinity is built and femininity is preserved. As mentioned before, masculinity is the embodiment of responsibility and strength, whereas femininity is the embodiment of innocence and play. I think it is the duty of every man to become strong, capable, and dangerous, whereas a woman's duty is to direct that man towards love and the protection of innocence. Men and women need one another to be able to reach their full potential. A man needs to be strong and capable enough to create an environment where play and innocence can flourish. Once that environment is created, women need to keep men from becoming cold and heartless by reconnecting him to his heart and inner child, where he too can play and love. As Friedrich Nietzsche points out, quote, "In the true man there is a child hidden. It wanted to play. Up then, ye women, and discover the child in man." Let's take a look at what happens to society when men dispense with their masculinity. There will always be tyrants in this world, people who look to rule with an iron fist and subjugate everyone to their will. The notion that we can socially train this behavior out of people with love and compassion is naive at best and completely destructive at worst. The only way to keep evil people at bay is when strong, principled men are a dime a dozen. The extreme minority of individuals who want to tyrannize people en masse are only able to do so if they don't fear the consequences of attempting to. Those consequences need to be handed out by strong men. On a smaller scale, there is a reason that predatory men target single mothers and their children. A strong man is to evil what a large dog is to a robber. It creates a scenario where victimizing an innocent person has far more risk than reward. Zooming back out to a social level, when the common man can be characterized by timidness, docility, and submissiveness, it creates a scenario where tyrants thrive. So, it's the moral duty of every man to become as strong, capable, and mature as possible in order to ensure this doesn't happen. Wherever men fail to pick up responsibility, a tyrant will seize it for themselves. Responsibility and freedom are inextricably linked. In every domain that common men fail to take responsibility, they also lose freedom. Becoming a strong man isn't easy, but it's the only option. History doesn't remember weak men, and if we're not trying to live a life worth remembering, what's the point of all this? The world needs an army of jacked nerds right now in order to keep the out-of-control tyrants at bay. So, what are you waiting for?
Mohammedans, my brothers of the sword. I'd rather fight beside you than any army of thousands. Let no man forget how menacing we are. We are lions! Do you know what's there? Waiting, beyond that beach. Immortality! Take it! It's yours!
If you enjoyed this video, I would urge you to subscribe to this channel, as we hope to set an example of what an everyday hero looks like. Everyone thinks you have to be the pinnacle of greatness in order to be a hero. This couldn't be further from the truth. A hero is just someone who doesn't do things they know to be wrong, and when being confronted with a problem, they take action. So, with that said, I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and we'll catch you next time.